Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. Not silence out of fear, not withdrawal out of weakness, but stillness from a place of mastery in a world that demands instant replies, visible emotion, and constant explanation. There is something quietly radical about a woman who chooses not to react, who holds her ground, not in defiance, but in dignity, who lets a storm pass without flinching. That woman does not deny emotion. She has simply outgrown the need to prove it. And that is when true presence begins, when the body no longer rushes, the mind no longer defends, and the heart no longer begs to be understood. She acts as if nothing bothers her, not because she doesn't feel, but because she has learned to feel without being ruled by what she feels. That calm, it's not personality. It's practice, it's neurobiology, it's wisdom earned through silence, choices, and self-awareness. There's a moment, almost invisible, that passes between what happens to you and how you respond to it. That space, often no more than a heartbeat wide, is where all your power lies. And it is in that space where emotional stillness begins. Not as a performance, not as suppression, but as a practice of self-respect. Many women grow up internalizing the idea that to be emotionally expressive is to be emotionally authentic, that to cry on cue, to shout in anger, or to respond immediately to injustice is a sign of strength. But the deeper truth is this: reaction is not always a sign of strength. In fact, unchecked reaction is often the residue of unhealed pain. Emotional stillness, by contrast, is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of clarity. Neuroscience has shown that the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for emotional response, fires within milliseconds of a perceived threat. Whether it's a harsh word, an ignored message, or a lover's emotional withdrawal, the brain often responds before we even register what's happened. Yet nestled between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making is a tiny but profound possibility, the ability to pause, to wait, to not obey the initial wave of feeling. This pause is where mastery begins. When a woman chooses not to react instantly, she doesn't lose anything, she gains. She gains presence, she gains choice. She gains the ability to respond from her highest self rather than from a recycled memory. Emotional stillness doesn't mean she has become numb. It means she has decided that not everything deserves the currency of her energy. There's a story of a woman who had been in a long relationship marked by highs and lows, frequent arguments, and the ever-repeating cycle of love and withdrawal. One day, after another emotional clash, her partner stormed out. Normally, she would chase after him, demand answers, send messages fueled by fear and longing. But this time, she didn't. She sat still. She made tea. She breathed. She felt the surge of emotion in her chest and did not deny it. But she also did not serve it. The hours passed. Silence remained. Her partner, expecting the usual pattern, felt the weight of her stillness in a way he had never felt her words. This is what many don't realize. When you act as if nothing bothers you, you interrupt the dance. The emotional game collapses. The other person is forced to confront themselves in the silence you have created. And in that silence, something awakens. Not just in them, but more importantly in you. Because emotional stillness trains your nervous system. Each time you resist the urge to fight, chase, or fix, you retrain the body to feel safe within itself. The cortisol drops, the heart rate slows, your breath returns to its rhythm, and as the body becomes still, the mind follows. This isn't detachment, it's recalibration. Physiologically, women often experience stronger emotional highs and lows due to fluctuating hormones, heightened mirror neuron sensitivity, and a brain more wired for empathy and emotional processing. This biological truth can make emotional stillness seem difficult, but also makes it even more powerful when practiced. You are not working against your nature. You are guiding it with wisdom. The next time you feel overlooked, dismissed, insulted, or even deeply hurt, pause. Not to suppress, but to observe, to listen inwardly. Often the real voice that needs your attention is not the one outside you. It is the quiet whisper inside that says, "You don't need to prove anything. You already are enough." When you hold your center in moments of intensity, others begin to recognize that you cannot be shaken easily. This creates a field of energy around you, a magnetic presence. And in relationships, this is felt deeply. Because emotional stillness is not just personal, it's relational. It teaches the people around you how to treat you. In one case, a woman shared how she decided to stop arguing with her partner over his habitual late replies. She had spent months expressing frustration, sending long messages, trying to extract reassurance. But one day, she simply stopped. Not out of bitterness, but from realization. She began to redirect her attention toward her own fulfillment, reading, learning, walking in nature, reconnecting with friends. Her energy shifted. Her emotional availability was no longer centered around his inconsistency. And strangely, he began to change, not because she pressured him, but because her stillness created a contrast he could not ignore. Stillness has a frequency. When you are grounded, others feel it. And this energy is not about arrogance or coldness. It is rooted in self-awareness. When you no longer allow every small offense or emotional disruption to enter your nervous system, you preserve your life force. And this life force, this inner resource, becomes the foundation of everything else. Yet stillness isn't only about what you feel internally. It's also about how you express externally. In a world that rewards loudness, sometimes the most impactful act is to say nothing. Not as a strategy to punish, not as manipulation, but as a declaration. I do not need to explain my worth. There's a deep form of grace in a woman who chooses silence, not because she's defeated, but because she's done participating in what doesn't reflect her values. This silence, when it is clean, not fueled by resentment, carries dignity. It allows the other person to see the mirror they've been avoiding. And it gives you time to see your own truth with more clarity. This brings us to the deeper truth. What you don't say often speaks louder than what you do. Psychology affirms that emotional regulation, not just expression, is a sign of maturity. And in relationships, restraint can be more loving than reaction. Because when you don't immediately respond to pain with pain, you leave space for healing. Imagine someone criticizing you unfairly, perhaps in a relationship or even in a family setting. Your habitual response might be defense, to argue, to make them see your side. But now, imagine pausing, breathing, looking into their eyes not with anger, but with presence, and then saying, I see that you're upset. I'm choosing not to respond right now. You haven't walked away. You've walked inward. And that shift is unforgettable. When you stop reacting to every emotion, you become deeply unpredictable. In the best way, the usual emotional scripts that others expect from you no longer work. The person who once knew how to make you cry, sulk, or over-explain suddenly faces something far more disarming: your calm, your gaze, your silence, your ease. And what is most beautiful is that you're no longer performing it. You're living it. You're not pretending to be unaffected. You've simply stopped feeding what drains you. And in that shift, your relationships begin to mirror your new state. This is the paradox. When you act as if nothing bothers you, not in denial, but in mastery, you begin to feel less bothered. The nervous system catches up to the mindset. The heart starts to trust your own inner leadership. And the mind, once cluttered with reactivity, begins to rest. Acting as if nothing bothers you doesn't mean being emotionless. It means being emotionally sovereign. You become the queen of your emotional landscape. You welcome feeling, but you no longer serve it blindly. You allow waves to rise, but you no longer drown in them. And in this shift, relationships change dramatically. People who once felt entitled to your emotional labor may feel confused or even challenged. They may push, provoke, or withdraw. But your job is not to restore the old patterns. Your job is to stay centered, to let silence speak, to let energy communicate what words never could. Because the real lesson isn't about appearing calm. It's about becoming calm, not for others, for yourself, so that no matter what happens around you, you are no longer pulled out of alignment. You are no longer reduced by someone else's chaos. You are the steady flame, not the flickering smoke. And this steadiness will attract new kinds of connections. Relationships based not on dependency, but resonance. People who feel at peace in your presence, not because you cater to their ego, but because your stillness invites them to meet themselves. This is what happens when a woman no longer uses her voice to beg, explain, or defend. Her energy becomes her language. Her boundaries become her sentence. Her silence becomes her punctuation. And her stillness becomes her wisdom. There is something quietly profound in realizing that most of your emotional reactions are not really about the present moment. They feel urgent. They feel true. But beneath the surface, they are echoes. Fragments of old stories repeating themselves through your nervous system. A partner's silence may awaken the voice of abandonment you felt as a child. A critical comment may reawaken the fear of inadequacy passed down by a parent who demanded perfection. We assume we are responding to now, but in reality, we are often borrowing responses from the past. This is why a woman who chooses to act as if nothing bothers her is not pretending. She is interrupting a pattern. She is no longer allowing the inherited emotional scripts to dominate her life. She sees what's happening, feels what's rising, but pauses before reacting. And in that pause, she begins a process called emotional re-patterning. Modern neuroscience refers to this as neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to change, adapt, and rewire itself based on repeated experience. When you stop reacting the same way to the same trigger, you create new neural circuits. And over time, those new circuits become your default. Your stillness isn't just a decision, it becomes your second nature. There was a woman who always found herself drawn to emotionally unavailable partners. The moment she felt distance, she panicked. She texted, overthought, analyzed every word. Her body would tighten, her breathing would become shallow. But then she began to notice a pattern. These responses mirrored the feeling she had as a child when her father would come home emotionally distant, distracted, or absent. She realized she had been carrying that script into every relationship since. One day, when the man she was seeing failed to respond as quickly as usual, her body tightened again. The urge to reach out rose like a wave, but she paused. She breathed. She whispered to herself, "This is not that. This is not then." And instead of reacting, she went for a walk. She felt the urge pass, not because it was no longer real, but because she no longer believed the story beneath it. That moment of stillness became a turning point. And not surprisingly, the man eventually texted. But by then, she was centered. She no longer needed the message to regulate her nervous system. Emotional triggers are doorways. They show you where your energy is still trapped in old narratives. And acting unaffected isn't avoidance. It's a sacred discipline. You are training yourself not to be ruled by recycled pain. You are choosing to respond from presence rather than projection. In relationships, this changes everything. When you stop reacting from wounded reflexes, you create space for intimacy, not just repetition. The person in front of you starts to experience you as you are now, not as the scared child, the anxious partner, or the guarded protector of old pain. And this presence invites a new kind of love. But presence cannot exist in a dysregulated body. Your nervous system holds your emotional history. Every unshed tear, every silenced scream, every time you swallowed your truth to keep the peace, it lives in the body. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. That's why learning to act as if nothing bothers you begins not in the mind, but in the breath, the chest, the gut. You must first make your body feel safe. This is not something dramatic. It is subtle. It is the choice to breathe deeper when you feel tension, to unclench your jaw when conflict arises, to notice the tightness in your stomach when you feel ignored, and rather than obey it, stay, observe. In this way, you become the parent to your own inner child. You offer comfort not through reaction, but through grounded presence. Stillness teaches you to become curious about your patterns rather than consumed by them. Why do you feel rejected when someone doesn't respond quickly? Why do you feel attacked when someone offers feedback? Why does silence feel unbearable? Each question is not a threat. It is a portal to freedom. Sometimes, what feels like emotional urgency is really an old version of you trying to survive. But you're not that person anymore. You are allowed to evolve. You are allowed to act from a different place. You are allowed to say, not this time. And in doing so, you cut a new path through the forest of your history. The transformation becomes even deeper when you begin to understand the physiological power of your presence. Your body does not exist in isolation. It communicates constantly with the bodies around you. This is known as co-regulation. When two people are in relationship, romantic or otherwise, their nervous systems sync. If one is anxious, the other may feel unsettled. If one is calm, the other begins to relax. A woman who has trained herself to remain still in the storm becomes a regulating force. She becomes the quiet in the middle of noise, the anchor when things feel uncertain. And this power is felt, not spoken. In fact, when your nervous system is calm, your words carry more weight. You don't need to raise your voice. You don't need to prove your point. Your energy speaks for you. There was a story of a couple in long-term conflict. The woman had grown tired of always being the one to initiate peace. But she also didn't want to repeat the same cycles. One day, instead of engaging in yet another argument, she sat quietly. She listened. She breathed. She didn't interrupt. When it was her turn to speak, she said only this: "I hear you. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to understand." Her partner was stunned. His body softened. He wasn't prepared for calm. He was prepared for a fight. But calm disarmed his defenses. And slowly, for the first time in years, they had a real conversation. You don't need to carry every conversation on your back. You don't need to fix every emotional rupture the moment it arises. Your grounded energy creates a container that invites others to meet you there. And if they don't, your stillness will reveal that too. Because stillness not only calms, it clarifies. People reveal themselves in silence. When you no longer rush to explain, to comfort, to make things okay, you give others the space to show who they really are. And more importantly, you get to observe without losing yourself. This kind of observation is not passive. It is active awareness. It is the choice to be present without being reactive. And it is one of the most powerful relational tools you can cultivate. It is often said that in moments of stress, people don't rise to the occasion. They fall to the level of their training. And the same is true emotionally. When things get hard, you don't magically become calm. You return to the emotional habits you've rehearsed. That's why daily practice matters. Not dramatic changes, but small, intentional acts of stillness. sitting quietly before responding to a difficult message, choosing to walk away from a heated moment to breathe, not to escape, noticing the difference between emotional urgency and emotional truth. Your presence is your practice, and your nervous system is your teacher. There is wisdom in remembering that not every emotion deserves expression. Some emotions are simply passing weather. If you react to every gust of wind, you will never find your inner stillness. But when you learn to anchor yourself, the weather can rage, and you remain unmoved. And this unmoved presence is not cold. It is warm with self-respect. It radiates quiet dignity. It says, I know who I am. I do not need chaos to feel alive. And in relationships, this kind of energy is rare. It creates safety, not through compliance, but through congruence. When your inner state matches your outer expression, you become trustworthy to yourself and to others. Emotional maturity is not about perfection. It is about intention. You will feel things deeply. You will be triggered. But what changes is how long you stay there, how quickly you return to yourself, how often you choose to observe rather than act from impulse. And the more you choose this path, the more your body begins to trust you. The hypervigilance fades, the anxiety quiets, the overthinking slows, because the body finally feels led, not by fear, but by presence. It is a strange gift to be the calm in a world that thrives on noise. But it is a gift worth cultivating, not for appearances, but for your own liberation. Because when nothing outside you can shake what is inside you, that is when true freedom begins. There is a deep misunderstanding in how women are often taught to express their value. From a young age, many are conditioned to prove their worth, to show care, to be helpful, to fix problems, to apologize quickly, to be agreeable. And when emotions rise in relationships, this tendency often intensifies. The pressure to be understood, to clarify intentions, or to defend one's actions becomes overwhelming. In the face of emotional tension, many instinctively move toward action. Words, explanations, messages, reactions. But something quietly radical begins to happen when a woman learns to act as if nothing bothers her. Not because she's numb, but because she has trained her mind to observe before responding, her heart to breathe through discomfort, and her energy to no longer chase validation. In doing so, she begins to reflect something deeply unfamiliar to most people: inner certainty. This energy is often misread as indifference, but it is, in truth, quiet confidence. There is a concept in Eastern wisdom called Wu Wei, the art of non-doing. It does not mean passivity. It means not forcing, not reacting just for the sake of reaction, not struggling against the current, but allowing the right movement to arise naturally from stillness. This principle, when applied to relationships, becomes transformative. It teaches a woman that she does not need to fix, force, or fear her way through connection. She can allow space. She can allow stillness. She can trust her presence without needing to constantly justify it. This form of confidence, however, is not always easy to understand from the outside. People are used to emotional signals. When you cry, they know you're hurt. When you get angry, they know you're upset. But when you remain composed, when you respond with stillness, people often don't know how to read you, and this can make them uncomfortable. But discomfort is not your problem to solve. Imagine a woman in a relationship where she often felt she had to explain her every emotion. Every time she pulled away to reflect, her partner would accuse her of being distant. Every time she chose silence over argument, he demanded explanations. But one day, she chose to no longer participate in this dynamic, not out of resentment, but out of clarity. When an argument arose and he expected her usual emotional outburst, she stayed calm. She didn't withhold. She just didn't react. She listened. She breathed. She said, "I'll speak when I'm ready." Her calmness was mistaken for indifference, but in truth, it came from her deep trust in her own energy. That night, she wrote in her journal, "I am no longer here to prove my softness. It is already within me. Let him feel the silence. Let him hear what I do not say." This is the beauty of not chasing the need to be understood. You begin to reclaim your time, your mind, and your inner world. You understand that not every emotion needs to be broadcasted to be valid. Not every misunderstanding must be corrected to be cleared. There is power in allowing things to pass through you without defining you. In modern relationships, where emotional codependency often masquerades as love, this quiet confidence is disruptive. People expect emotional reactions to maintain a certain rhythm. When you do not react, you break the rhythm. You disrupt the cycle. And it is in that disruption that clarity emerges. You no longer dance to the music of someone else's expectations. You become the one who sets the pace. This doesn't mean you become cold or distant. On the contrary, you become more present. But your presence is no longer a performance. It is rooted. It is calm. It says, "I am here, but I do not need to be consumed to prove it." This shift requires deep self-awareness, because when you first begin to act as if nothing bothers you, it may feel like suppression. But with time, you will come to see that you are not suppressing, you are redirecting. You are choosing where to place your energy. You are refusing to let emotional volatility be the measure of your love. You are learning to sit with discomfort without using someone else's attention to soothe it. And this has physiological effects. The body begins to relax. The nervous system resets. Your breath deepens. You no longer hold your shoulders up to your ears in anticipation of conflict. You stop bracing for emotional impact. Instead, you move with a new rhythm, one that says, "I do not chase. I attract. I do not react. I reflect. I do not control. I respond with wisdom." This inner posture changes everything. Consider the way a queen carries herself. She does not need to convince others of her royalty. Her presence is enough. She does not speak to prove her intelligence. She speaks when her words carry value. Her silence is not emptiness, it is power withheld until the right moment. In many ways, a woman who embodies this energy becomes deeply magnetic, not because she is always available, but because her energy is intentional. And in romantic relationships, this intentionality becomes the space where true connection grows. When a woman stops trying to prove her worth through emotional labor, she invites her partner to meet her in a more conscious space. She is no longer performing pain to get attention. She is no longer over-explaining to earn compassion. She is no longer playing small to make others feel more comfortable. Instead, she rests. She lets the silence teach. She allows her consistency, her self-care, and her grounded energy to communicate what words never could. There's a quiet moment that many women know well. The pause after sending a message and waiting for a reply. In that moment, the mind races. Did I say too much? Should I clarify? Why hasn't he responded? But now imagine a woman who uses that moment differently. She feels the urge to seek reassurance, but instead, she places the phone down. She walks outside, she breathes. She reminds herself, his response does not determine my value. And in that shift, she reclaims her power, not by controlling the outcome, but by anchoring her presence. When a woman no longer chases the need to be seen, she becomes visible in a whole new way. People begin to notice her energy, her grace, her ability to hold space without rushing to fill it. And this quality is deeply attractive, because in a world that constantly pulls at your attention, the ability to remain still is rare, and rare things are valued. There is an old saying, water flows where attention goes. And when you withdraw your emotional attention from chaos, from drama, from the need to explain, You redirect the flow of energy back to yourself. That energy becomes healing. It becomes clarity. It becomes a well you can draw from again and again. This doesn't mean you never share how you feel. It means you share from a place of sovereignty, not from desperation. You speak not to be heard, but to offer clarity. And you are no longer attached to how it is received. This is the mark of someone who has made peace with misunderstanding. Someone who knows that silence can sometimes speak the truth more clearly than explanation. There's a beauty in letting people not understand you, in allowing others to have their own perceptions while you remain grounded in your own knowing. You don't fight to correct every wrong impression. You don't rush to soften every sharp edge others perceive. You allow others their process, because you are deep enough within your own truth that their confusion no longer rattles you. And this confidence has a texture. It is not brittle. It is not loud. It is soft yet unshakable. It moves slowly. It doesn't seek the spotlight. It doesn't argue. It simply exists. And in its existence, it calls others to rise or fall, but never at your expense. In relationships, this changes the dynamic. When a woman acts from this space, she becomes an invitation, not a pursuit. She becomes a mirror, not a projection. And in that mirror, others must confront themselves. Some will rise, some will retreat, but all will feel the presence of someone who does not chase, does not explain, does not defend. She simply is. And that is more than enough. There are certain truths that only become visible in stillness. And for many women, those truths remain hidden, not because they are complicated, but because the world around them is too loud. Noise takes many forms: overthinking, emotional chaos, constant explanations, unending conversations, mental storytelling. It creates a layer of static between what you feel and what is real. And so clarity remains elusive, not due to lack of intelligence or awareness, but because there is no silence in which it can land. But when a woman chooses to act as if nothing bothers her, when she withdraws her energy from reaction and places it back into quiet observation, something extraordinary begins to unfold. In the stillness, she starts to see things as they are, not as she fears them to be. And this is where truth lives. This is where intuition sharpens. This is where wisdom begins. There's a subtle discipline in not engaging with every emotion the moment it arises. And it is in that discipline that a woman trains herself to observe rather than absorb. She begins to see the difference between her own thoughts and the projections of others, between her wounds and the actual words spoken, between what's really happening and what she's afraid is happening. Stillness becomes the lens through which she can separate noise from meaning. This type of presence doesn't come easily. It is developed slowly, often through trial and reflection. And sometimes it arrives after chaos has exhausted her. There's a woman who once lived in a state of perpetual emotional analysis. Every word her partner spoke became a puzzle to decode. Every pause in communication, every shift in tone, every delayed message triggered spirals of doubt. And each time she tried to make sense of it, she only became more lost. Her thoughts raced faster than her intuition could speak. Until one day, sitting in the quiet of her room, she did something radical. She chose to stop. She stopped chasing answers. She stopped reacting. She stopped believing that every change in behavior had to mean something personal. Instead, she sat in stillness and asked a different question. What if this is not about me? And in that question, clarity began to arrive. Slowly, not all at once, but steadily, she began to realize how much of her suffering came not from what happened, but from her interpretation of it, her attempts to control it, her need to solve what wasn't even hers to carry. Stillness does not mean the absence of thought. It means the absence of noise masquerading as thought. In this quieter state, the nervous system relaxes. The brain moves from high, alert survival mode into a more regulated, observant state. This physiological shift is profound. When you are not under threat, you can see with greater accuracy. You notice patterns instead of reacting to symptoms. You start to feel the energy behind words, not just the words themselves. You begin to recognize manipulation, emotional immaturity, and unconscious behavior, not with judgment, but with clarity. And in that clarity, you stop participating in your own confusion. This is where true emotional freedom begins. You are no longer trapped in the loop of proving, fixing, explaining, defending. You are simply watching, and in that watchful stillness, a new kind of intelligence awakens. One that is not based on emotion or logic alone, but on deep embodied awareness. Stillness reveals what conversation hides. So often, when things feel unstable in a relationship, the first instinct is to talk, to clarify, to define, to get answers. And while communication is vital, not all communication brings clarity. Some conversations are just repetitions of fear. Some are just rehearsals of pain dressed up as problem solving. But when you pause before speaking, when you choose stillness first, you give yourself the gift of discernment. You can now ask yourself, is what I'm about to say rooted in wisdom? Or is it coming from a place of lack? That moment of pause changes everything. There's a quote often shared in mindfulness circles. Don't speak unless you can improve upon the silence. In relationships, this doesn't mean silence should replace honesty, but it means silence should come before it. Silence creates the space in which honesty can be shaped by compassion rather than urgency. It allows you to speak from your highest clarity, not your lowest fear. And this inner clarity often exposes what you were not ready to see before. A woman once shared how her partner would emotionally withdraw whenever they had disagreements. For months, she tried to fix it through conversation, compromise, vulnerability. But nothing changed. Then she stopped, not out of bitterness, but because she realized she was doing all the emotional lifting. She sat with herself. She didn't reach out. She didn't react. She simply observed, and in that stillness, the truth became clear. She was in a one-sided emotional relationship. Her partner didn't avoid conflict out of pain. He avoided responsibility. This insight didn't come from a therapist, a friend, or a book. It came from within, from the intelligence that rises when emotion settles and awareness returns. Stillness is not passive. It is the most active form of listening you can engage in. It listens not just to others, but to your own intuition, to the quiet nudges that you usually override in the name of love, hope, or potential. In stillness, you see clearly that what you hoped for is not what is. You stop arguing with reality, and from that place, real change becomes possible. This is why stillness must be practiced, not just reserved for crisis. It must become part of your daily rhythm, not hours of meditation or retreats into solitude, but moments of inner anchoring. When someone says something that hurts, breathe before replying. When you're triggered by a message, wait before responding. When you feel the urge to chase closure, ask yourself what you're really seeking. Each of these moments is a training ground. Each is an invitation to remain rooted in yourself. The body becomes your compass in this practice. When something is aligned, you feel calm. When something is off, your body tightens. Pay attention to these signals. The body tells the truth even when the mind is confused, and stillness allows you to hear it. In the silence, your standards return. You remember what you actually want, not just what you're willing to tolerate. You recall the woman you are when you're not contorting yourself to be understood. You see the relationship for what it is, not what you wish it to be. And sometimes this clarity will lead you to stay. Other times it will lead you to walk away. But either way, the decision will be yours, not made from fear, but from awareness. There is immense peace in choosing yourself without needing someone else to be wrong. This is the wisdom that stillness gives you. You no longer need to villainize anyone to justify your boundaries. You don't need chaos to prove something is broken. You can simply see it and respond from that seeing. And even when someone tries to disturb your peace, when they accuse you of being cold, distant, unloving, you remain centered because you know the difference between stillness and silence, between emotional withdrawal and emotional sovereignty. You know that your choice to stay calm is not a defense, it's a decision to no longer engage with noise. Relationships built on awareness require stillness as their foundation. Not because silence solves everything, but because it creates the space in which truth can emerge. And from truth, love can grow. Not performative love, not rescuing love, but conscious, grounded, reciprocal love. So you keep returning to stillness, not because you're escaping conflict, but because you're meeting yourself there, again and again, until you become so familiar with your own inner voice that nothing outside you can shake your center, until you are no longer waiting for clarity to come from others, because you found it within. In the stillness, you don't just find answers, you find yourself. When a woman learns to act as if nothing bothers her, she is not turning away from life. She is turning toward herself. She begins to reclaim the sacred space between stimulus and response, where her power has always lived. She no longer wastes her energy explaining her worth, reacting to emotional chaos, or chasing clarity outside herself. Instead, she moves through the world anchored in silence, speaking only when truth calls her to, responding only when her peace is not at stake. Stillness becomes her strength, not because she lacks feeling, but because she has chosen wisdom over reaction, presence over panic. In her calmness, others begin to feel the weight of their own noise. In her grounded energy, emotional games collapse. In her silence, reality is revealed. She no longer asks to be seen. She is undeniable. She no longer begs to be understood. She understands herself. What once made her feel invisible becomes the source of her visibility. What once made her feel vulnerable becomes the root of her resilience. She doesn't rise above emotion. She rises through it with grace. And in this rising, she becomes the woman who is not only unshaken, but unforgettable.